so we begin.
Yes, ma'am.
A.
Amen.
Try this one. Ale. You're getting the hang of it. So, little things like that, you feel just that little good energy bubble up. And anything we can do to bring good energy is a good thing. If we had more time, we'd play more. Studies are pretty clear. People that play together stay together. And people that pray together stay together. That's why, the fellowship and fun time at our fraternities really is important. It shouldn't be just, business or just service. Your service should be fun. Make those times fun. Well, this afternoon section is going to be about working with our hearts and our heads. We heard Father Maher talk in his homily the other day, and he didn't know that this was the name of my presentation for this afternoon, working with our hearts and our heads, because we need both. Oh, this one's not on. We need both. We need to work with our hearts and our heads. So this particular section of the presentation is going to be on emotional intelligence. Now, it's important to know that emotional intelligence doesn't have anything to do with your IQ. Nothing to do with your IQ. So it's really based on how well you can get along with other people, how well you manage yourself. And we want to look at what that is, because it's actually going to help us. One of the great things about emotional intelligence, just like listening, is it's a skill we can improve upon. And it's important to note it's not the opposite of regular intelligence, but it's the triumph of our heart over our head. It's the intersection of both. But we want to lead as Franciscans with our heart. But we also, our head is important here as well. So, when you think about successful relationships, has anybody been in a relationship with somebody who's a know-it-all?
My wife.
Okay, I'm not going there at all. But, that's important. There was a quote, and I know he probably wasn't the first person to say it. I'm big on quotes. They help me through life. Those of you may know Dr. Wayne Dyer had a quote, "If you have a choice between being right or kind, be kind." And, there's that, falling down that we do. So it's not, who's the smartest person in the room with their IQ. We want to work on being a smarter person in the room with our emotional intelligence. So here's a great definition. Travis Bradbury wrote a great book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, if anybody's interested. It's a very good book. And he says emotional intelligence is your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships. This is a very powerful skill we can all work on. And it's a good book. So our goals here today is to give you a baseline understanding of emotional intelligence. Now, this is going to be pretty high level here. We don't have time to drill down into all these components. But basically, we want you to hopefully understand what the role of emotional intelligence is and how it plays out in your relationships. To understand the 4 core components, because there are 4 parts to emotional intelligence. To get a better handle on your reactions and responses. And then to give you some strategies and skills on how you can increase your own emotional intelligence. So So the four core components of emotional intelligence we have right up here: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Now there are different EI gurus out there. Sometimes they have a fifth one for empathy, or they have different names. But this is the real base of it. And understanding that self-awareness is where we recognize our own emotions. Self-management is how to positively manage those responses. Social awareness is where we recognize the emotions of others. And relationship management is positively responding. Oftentimes we can be quick to react, and reactions aren't always so great. So, it's having those pieces. So the building blocks of self-awareness. The first one is to understand your own emotions. When you're coming into a situation, what are you feeling? Volunteers here. Who'd like to share how they might feel going into a difficult conversation? Anxious. Defensive. What else? Dread. Insecure. How do you feel that in your body?
Stress.
You feel stress? What's stress feel like? Tension. Tight muscles. Red face. Upset stomach. You can't sleep. Anybody here ever experienced any of those feelings before? Right before I started this. It's harder to present to your family than it is to strangers.
But just remember, we love you.
I know. And that is the one thing every one of us needs to remember. I always feel okay to make mistakes because I know you love me.
The Holy Spirit's right there, I can see it.
Why, thank you.
No, you're not alone.
So you want to recognize also, how are your emotions affecting other people? If you go in there and your face is red and you're like this, or you go in to talk to someone, to have a conversation with someone, and you walk in and you see them. Any impact on you? Absolutely. We want to be aware of what it is we're putting out there. Some folks I've heard refer to it as emotional Wi-Fi, right? That's what we're putting out there. So this is where it's important for us to understand our strengths and our weaknesses, because our weaknesses are opportunities for growth. Absolutely. So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at our emotional changes. Now, regardless of what you may think, you can't control your emotions. An emotion is something that you feel. You can manage your response to that emotion. You ever feel like upset and someone comes up and says, "Oh, don't worry about this, it's going to be fine." Does that take away all the worry? It can make it worse. So you want to recognize that and figure out for yourself, what can you do? That can come about. It can show itself in physical ways, some of which you've already mentioned. Tight muscles, tense shoulders, quick breathing, red face, sweaty palms. I mean, you name it. There are a lot of different ways. Another thing you want to be aware of, are there things out there that are triggers for you? Are there topics that are triggers for you? Is there something you care deeply about and someone did something that you felt disrespected that? If you want to know what your values are, find out what makes you mad. Because what makes you angry is something often that goes against your values. So if you're coming into a situation where someone's done something that you feel is really egregious, really anti-Franciscan, just not so great at all. Maybe you're really mad about it. Like, I can't believe they think this. This is absolutely wrong. This goes against the church. There's catechism numbers with this. There's canon law. Trigger, folks. Be aware of it before you go into that situation. Because it's going to change your perspective. It's not going to allow you to manage your emotions. What it's going to do is let your emotions manage you. So, what does successful self-awareness look like? Well, the first thing is we're not going to judge our emotions. We're going to identify them. I'm feeling kind of nervous right now. And I'm going to name it. Don't just say, oh, I don't feel so great. What are you feeling? It's just like when we get to the problem. To say, oh, there's an issue, we have to say what it is. When you go to confession, do you go in and say, I did something bad? No, because we want to name it. Be specific. Just like Father Maher talked about our intentionality with prayer. Name people. You want to know what it is. You want to know your strengths and you want to know your weaknesses. When we identify our areas of strength, they can help us to overcome those areas of weakness. Another really important thing is ask for feedback. After a conversation, say to someone, how do you think I did? Honest feedback. Did I talk too much? Did I go too fast? Did I miss anything? And do that for one another. And then learning new skills, and that's what we're focused on today. So 4 questions I give you, you can ask yourself. This is to check your own self-awareness in a situation. What are you feeling? Why am I feeling this? Once you know if it's the same thing more than once, you can prepare. And it'll help you to be ready the next time. Asking yourself the question outright, is this a trigger for me? Is there an issue that I have really strong feelings about? And it really brings up my emotions. And then, what is your body language saying? You know, I touched on that a little bit earlier today. Remember that open body posture. Being able to have an inviting smile. Letting people physically feel that is important. So after self-awareness comes self-management. Now note it isn't control. It's managing. There's a difference, right? And management and control. So the first step in self-management is to understand your values. What's important to you? We need to know our Franciscan values. What does our rules say? What does our charism say? Are your values in line with that? Understand, how do you handle stress? Who wants to share? How do you handle stress? Fishing. Eating. Playing the piano. Go for a walk. Those are all things you might want to do to prepare. Find out for yourself what works. When to speak and when to listen. You're going to hear this more than once today. Remember, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. Another thing is to welcome new ideas. That's the way we've always done it. Anybody heard that before? If that was true, we'd be rolling rocks around, right? We want to welcome new ideas. This gives birth to wonderful, beautiful things. We're called to live and the sign of the times. I had a friar say to me not too long ago, he said, we were talking about people who want to wear habits. And he said, you know, if you really want to take on what Francis wanted you to do, to dress like poor people, you'd be going out in a pair of ripped jeans and an old t-shirt.
But that's popular now.
Well, maybe there's more Franciscans out there than we know. We got to look for those vocations. But, you know, look at new ideas. See opportunity. When you only see obstacles, you will never find a solution. When you look for opportunities, you'll find solutions. Is it always going to be easy? Nope. But if all you see are obstacles, have you ever been in that situation or been in a conversation with someone? This is never going to work.
Yep. I got a visitation next month, and that's fraternity.
It's not going to work.
No.
And when you've already shut the door, you've shut your mind, we can do this. We can do hard things. That's another one of my little mantras. And then the sixth thing here is to slow things down. If someone asks me a question, I don't need to have an answer right away. And what's one of the things we talked about this morning? People need time to do what? To process. Very, very important. So, self-management really takes us from knowing ourselves to knowing how to conduct ourselves. And there's a step there. But we have to know who we are first. So what does self-management success look like? Well, we stay calm. We prepare for responses. What are some good things to say? I call them back pocket phrases. One of my favorites, and you'll see it a little bit later, is, I need a few minutes to process that. And it slows everything down for everyone. It creates that silence that everybody can think, not just you. Openly admit mistakes. Now, this is what, the third or fourth time we've heard this today, because it's important. What I'm going to tell you is apologize for what you do, not for who you are. That's important. When you apologize, name it. I'm really sorry I interrupted you so many times. Will you forgive me? Ask for that reconciliation. Ask for that peace. When you ask that person to actively forgive you, they've got to think about it. It's not just, sorry, I did that. We're constantly working on building relationship. Suspend judgment. I know why they did that. Yep, I do. They don't respect anybody. They think they can come in here and do things their own way. I'm not dealing with that kind of attitude anymore. Some of you may have seen there was a story that kind of went around on social media not too long ago. There was a man on a subway train, and his children were just running all over, yelling, jumping off the seats. And a lady was watching and saying, look at this guy, he can't control his kids. And finally she had enough, and she said, sir, can't you control your children? And he said, I'm sorry. just lost their mother. That story always makes me cry, and I hope it always does. We don't know someone else's cross. We don't know anyone else's pain. We could be that person. We could have someone who's struggling. And that's why we want to be able to respond rather than react. Planful response. So, a couple of questions you can ask yourself as you try to manage your emotions. What am I missing? Should I step back? Try to see a bigger picture. Sometimes we get so engrossed in the details, we forget we're dealing with a person here. What voice am I listening to? Whose voice should you be listening to? The Holy Spirit. Jesus, Francis, Claire. That's the voice we should be listening to. And then asking yourself, literally, what would be the most effective way to respond right now? This is why we have to slow things down. Give yourself room to be able to respond. Now we'll move into social awareness. So, what are other people feeling? What are some ways you can tell what other people are feeling? By their what? Facial expressions, body language, their shoulders, where their eyes are.
How you feel.
How you feel.
I mean, I noticed that when I was practicing, sometimes I'd go into a room and I would immediately feel upset or angry or anxious. And I realized after all, it wasn't me. That it was that Wi-Fi stuff, you know. I couldn't tell you why I knew. It's
Well, then you're tuned in. What did we say in that servant leadership song? I will weep when you are weeping. Remember I talked a little earlier about reflecting emotions. You want to be there with that person. Are their needs being met? Do they need tissues? Do they need a drink of water? You know, again, we have physical, emotional, psychological, different needs. Am I creating a comfortable climate for this conversation? Is everyone included? Now, most likely, when you're having a conversation in a difficult situation, you should have two people there. One person shouldn't be doing all the talking. Everyone should be included. And if there's more people there, you need to pay attention to the group to see, does someone else have something to say? We touched on mutual invitation before. These skills don't have to just be in a difficult situation. They can be in any group setting. And then, are people feeling heard? Anyone have the situation where someone tells you something and then they tell you again and again and again and again? How many people? Show of hands. What happened to? You know what that usually means, folks? They don't think you heard them. When someone's trying to make a point with you and they keep repeating it and repeating it, they're saying, you don't hear me. That's a signal to you. Another piece of this is recognizing and respecting differences. We don't have to agree with the way someone chooses to live their life to respect them. We don't have to agree on how to say morning prayer, right? I've seen people have like grumbly disagreements. And I loved it when, I don't know, as a friar somewhere said, we just keep going. We don't need to stop and correct people. It's prayer. We're praying to God. You know, when we think of it in this situation, right, it might seem trivial. But in another situation, maybe somebody gets really upset about it. But we want to respect people. Maybe that's a trigger for somebody. I'm not really sure. You know, and another really big piece of this is empathy. I've got a little video I'm going to show you. I keep naming all these people that I like to read. Any Brene Brown fans here? I'll show you her, well, share her little video on empathy. My youngest son spent a year working in South Africa at an NGO and kept a blog there on Tumblr while he was there that I enjoyed reading. And he wrote this one piece that really touched me. And it was a funeral. And he went to several. There were a number of people that died in the village that he was helping. And he said, Mom, when they had, well, he didn't say Mom, but I pretended he was writing to me. He said, the funerals here are very different from the funerals back home. And he was an altar server. His mother was the director of religious ed, so he was there all the time, right? He said, I was very familiar. The funerals back home, they played and sang all the same songs, said all the same prayers. And afterwards, people would stop by the family and drop off a casserole. He said, here in the village, they celebrated the life of the person, and everyone came. They told the story of the death, of what happened, with no embarrassment, to share the truth, eliminate any gossip. And the village supported the family every day. They didn't drop off a casserole, send a mass card, and say, I'm good. And it just really struck me that that's what he saw in his experience here in the U.S. And here in an area with extremely poor people, that they were there for one another. And the fact that they were completely honest. He said if someone died from an addiction, they explained it with honesty. They still celebrated the life of the person. They lost a lot of people to AIDS. They shared that with honesty. And people were there to love and support them. We can all, if we choose to, relate to someone else's sadness. We don't have to have had the same sadness, but recognizing someone else's struggle, we can relate to a struggle that we've had and how difficult it was. So that's empathy work is something you'll see. I have a sticker on my water bottle that says empathy is cool. That's, you know, it's more than cool. It's essential to who we are. So social awareness success, what does it look like? You need to care about your impact on other people. You need to respect other perceptions. Father Marek showed us the visual. It's a 6. Nope, it's a 9. Things can look different from different places. Really paying attention, watching body language, listening, being present for the person. Ability to read other people. Can you tell when someone else is feeling uncomfortable? The only way you can tell is if you're really paying attention. Because if you're caught up in what you're going to say and what you're going to respond, you don't have time for them. So that slowing it down and being able to sense what's happening. And remembering to use people's names. You know, one of the ways people can dehumanize people is by not using their names. He, she, they. Say their name. Social awareness checks. Am I distracted? That's an easy thing to be, is distracted. You can have a lot of things on your mind. So you have to really work hard to focus. That what is the pulse of the room? You can walk in and you feel the tension so big you could cut it with a knife. Maybe it's joyful. Who knows? Are you paying attention to the people there to know what that is? And are people engaged with you? Are people listening to you? Are people understanding? Do you see like a quizzical look on someone's face, like maybe they didn't quite understand? And you don't have to say, did you understand that? What you can do is say, let me explain that a different way to be sure I'm clear. These are the ways we can do little things that help people without belittling people. And then, again, have I recognized people? But have I recognized who they are as a person? That, you know, human dignity. And then the last piece here we're going to talk about is relationship management. We want to focus on building relationships. One of the ways to continue to do that is to recognize conflict early. It's like when you're walking and you have that little stone in your shoe, and you're like, oh, these are lace-up sneakers. They're a pain. I need a chair to sit down in. I'm going to keep walking. What happens? You can get a blister, you could get a hole, I mean, a number of things. But, you know, it's just like this with problems. When we try to address things at a lower level, we have a better chance of success in maintaining that relationship. Being sure everyone understands. Are we all on the same page? Does that necessarily mean everybody's understanding? No, it's more to it than just saying that. What's your takeaway from what we said today? How about you? How about you? How about you? Really checking in. As a leader, one of the ways to do this is to provide a clear vision. You know, somebody mentioned SMART goals the other day. And SMART goals start with something that's specific. If you're coming into your council meeting or a meeting with a person, you want to have a purpose for that. What's your goal? We're here today, and that's why agendas are good. We're going to focus on our minutes, our treasurer's report, right? It helps keep us focused. Give that same attention to conversations. Be planful. And then tap into people's values and desires. You know, people in our fraternities, I would say for the most part, want to and desire to be Franciscans. They desire to follow Francis. So how do we tap into that? And no matter what the difference, find common ground. Find something you can agree on. We had a fraternity in our region that was experiencing a lot of conflict, a lot of problems getting along. And so I went out and to do some conflict resolution work with them. And one of the activities I did is I had everyone write down what was most important to them about their life as Franciscans. And they wrote it on a piece of paper. And then everyone went up and wrote on newsprint what was most important and what they valued most. People were shocked because many of them had written the same things. So we can find that common ground. We might just have to look for it a little harder. So, you know, stepping back to basics. What does success look like? Well, resolving conflict. We can influence other people. We can't control other people. Now, has anyone ever heard the Aesop fable about the sun and the wind? Yep. Susan's heard it. Well, the sun and the wind saw there was a man walking down the street with a coat on. And the wind said to the sun, "I'm stronger than you. I bet I can blow that coat right off his back." Sun said, "You're on." So the wind blew. And blew and blew and blew. And the harder the wind blew, the tighter the man held his coat. He gave up. Sun's turn. The sun shone gently. And guess what the man did? He took off his coat. With gentle and persistent persuasion, is going to take us further in a more loving fashion than, the person who sees everybody, if they're a hammer, they're looking for nails. You may have heard that. We can't go in there and just pound people. That goes against who we are as Franciscans. So we can influence other people. We cannot control them. We need to understand that. Developing other people, helping them grow in their faith, grow in their Franciscan vocation, acknowledging the good things people have done. Now, some of you may have heard, if as a manager you need to give somebody feedback, you have to give them a sandwich, right? You take two good things and in the middle you stick something else. Nope. I don't prescribe to that. Because they're still in the middle. Say to someone instead, you're really good at doing morning prayer and leading us. And I also really respect the work that you do in your parish. What I'd like to do is to work with you and to help you to build your skills on this. You see the difference there? Because you're offering to help someone. We can't force them to change. And I can't say you're good at this and this, but you're lousy at this. Right? But you can offer to help someone to become better at it. Or to help you learn more. We can work together to learn more. And then it becomes that accompaniment, that journey. So how do you ask yourself, have you exhibited trust? We've heard that word a lot today. Have you shown respect? What do people need? And have I been articulate? Are people clear about my purpose, my intention? So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to partner up with somebody that you haven't worked with today and think about the 4 areas that we've talked about: the self-awareness, the self-management, social awareness, relationship management, and something for you that was like a key takeaway, something that you're going to maybe work on, something that kind of a thought that resonated with you. And we'll take about 10 minutes or so to just work on that. As Franciscans, we strive to be peacemakers. So we want to avoid violence of any kind. Sometimes we think about, violence, physical violence. But violence with our words, sometimes with our silence. There are a lot of ways we can perpetrate violence, and we want to be aware of that. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Oh.
So, Mary Frances quoted from the blurb from the book, but if anything that causes hurt can be classified as violent, I'm thinking about the difference between, using a scalpel as a doctor would use it versus stabbing someone with a knife. Both of those could hurt, but one is designed to heal I think we have to be a little more cautious, because I think especially as Franciscans, we oftentimes don't act because we're afraid of causing some hurt. But some hurt is necessary in certain situations for the people who experience that hurt to grow. Some pain is necessary to jostle us out of our complacency, our belief that we're doing the right thing, or when in reality we're actually causing more harm and exacerbating a bad situation because of our inaction, or our pointing to everybody else to blame them for the things that are happening and all of that. Okay?
Thank you for sharing that. I think when Diane was talking about trust and about parents, there are things, sometimes we make decisions that are in the best interest that may not feel so great, but there also are opportunities for growth for the individual, and we have to look at that. And we're going to get now into talking more about those difficult conversations, but I want to share this video with you on empathy that I think you'll enjoy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space where someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I'm crying too.
Isn't that a great little video?
Yes.
So we want to be aware of empathy. Now we're going to move into the second part of this afternoon's presentation, making difficult conversations easier. Now, I want you to note, it doesn't say making them easy. Easier. And giving you some specifics on how to do that. So, when you're faced with a conversation that you have to have that's going to be difficult, we have 2 choices. You can avoid it, or you can discuss it. How many folks, by a show of hands, feel generally stressed or anxious before they're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody? Well, according to a national study, you're not alone.
And the other 33% are lying.
Yeah. Or they're not very self-aware.
Or they're narcissists.
But I think it's important for us to recognize that most people feel anxious before a difficult conversation is coming up. We, especially with our charism, we don't want to hurt anybody. And I think, this kind of touches on, Father Jerome, what you were saying. We want to help people heal. We want to help our fraternities heal when there's hurt. And how do we do that? So, all of you are in positions of leadership. Leadership carries responsibilities. You are, in some ways, like a guardian to your fraternity. So, one of the first strategies I'm going to give you is called the rule of 3. The first time someone does something, you're going to ignore it. Now, if it's something that's especially egregious, you're going to address it. But the first time, let's say, Joey comes to the fraternity meeting and he is all over the place. He's interrupting people. I'm not gonna sit down and have the council meet with him the first time. But I want to note that it happened. The second time it happens, I'm going to document it. And I want to include that I noted it happened before. The third time something happens, there's a pattern emerging. And that means we need to address it. We wait 9 months, 10 months, a year. We've actually supported the problem. When you're silent, what does that do? It reinforces it. It assumes that you're supporting something. So that rule of 3 can help you. But there's responsibility here. You want to note that it happened. You want to document that it happened. Maybe it's in your notes at a council meeting. And then the third time, that's when you start to come up with a plan for action. So Vicki, go ahead.
Does ignore really mean ignore in the sense of saying nothing?
No, it does not. So thank you for pointing that out. It does not mean don't pretend it didn't happen. It means you don't have to have a big meeting. You're right? You can say, try to settle somebody down or whatever, but it's not disciplinary at this point. Regardless of when, you want to make sure you're calm and collected. You don't want to respond in the heat of the moment. You're not going to be having very good self-awareness or management or any of those emotional intelligence skills. If you're going to talk about something difficult, find a private place to do it. That's showing respect for the person. And you want to allow enough time. So this needs to be planful. You can't say, our fraternity gathering is usually from 2 to 4, and we're ending with a social time, and then at 3:45, Jane, we need to talk to you. Right? That's not fair for anybody. Now we've compressed this, we got 15 minutes, maybe somebody had plans. We want to respect the person and respect that time. So how do you plan for that difficult conversation? Well, the first thing you do is pray. Then, in line with our emotional intelligence, you want to check your emotions. What are you feeling? How are you managing that? As you're looking at the situation, You want to assume the other person has good intentions. You're giving them that benefit of a doubt. And you want to stay focused on the issue. It's not that, he's a bad person. It's the actions you want to address. Interrupting people, talking over people, that's the issue. Joey's not the issue. It's the actions. And those little shifts in perspective can help to make things much more successful. So gather your data. You've made notes. When you sit down to someone, you can't say, "You're doing this all the time." You can calmly say, when we met in October, this happened. When we met in November, this happened. Use people's names. Bring the situation back. You also want to note the impact that it has on your fraternity. This isn't just about you and him or you and her. When you did that, everybody shut down and other people didn't have an opportunity to share. So you really want to know your purpose. Why are you having this conversation? What is your desired outcome? Changed behavior is most likely, but what behavior is it you want changed? So you need to know that. This was actually in your servant leadership handbook about using I statements. So it shifts again, these little perspective shifts, the focus to your own experiences. It can help, to bring down things a little bit, especially if it's getting heated, and it makes it easier for everyone to find a solution. So instead of saying, "You need to stop interrupting me," versus, "I felt really disrespected when you interrupted me." And sometimes I'll add, "Was that your intention?" I've never had anybody say yes, except for my brother. And he was just kidding. True story. But that was, sibling love there. But there's some great examples in the Servant Leadership Handbook about how to do that. So shift the focus. So have people, have somebody else figure out, what is it you're going to say? How are you going to phrase that? That's part of planning. Don't go into difficult conversations without prayer and a lot of planning. I touched on these a little bit earlier, and I want to do so again, just as a reminder, to be fully present to the person. Don't interrupt, even if it means you have to listen for a long time. Don't interrupt. That's why we need to be sure we have an appropriate amount of time to discuss something. Commit yourself to patience. If you're an impatient person, maybe go spend some time in prayer. Spend some time before the Blessed Sacrament. Tell yourself, literally, "I am going to be patient." So that when you're not, hopefully it'll help you to recognize it. And listen with your eyes. You're really watching that person, paying attention. In these difficult situations, so much of our communication is done with our body language. In high tense and highly emotional situations, studies have been done that say 55% of our communication comes from body language. About 35% from our tone of voice, and only about 7% are words. Now that's in emotional situations, not in everyday conversation. That gets twisted a little bit out there sometimes. So you want to be aware of that. Be curious. We're seeking understanding and being honest to say, I don't get it. Help me to understand. Listen to understand rather than to respond. This is something I think every person in this room, I'm confident to say, we've all struggled with this at least once, if not many more times. Someone else is talking, and we start to formulate our response. And as soon as you start to do that, you're not listening. I actually have that as a question on a quiz for people. And people always think that they're supposed to say yes. And it's because of the way I have the little quiz set up. But we need to listen all the way through. And that's hard to do because our mind starts, putting things together according to our own perspective. So really, committing to patience, listening with curiosity. And again, paraphrase and reflect. This is what I'm hearing. Someone's sad. You don't have to say they're sad, but you want to recognize that and be with that person. And then to ask open-ended questions. That means, do you understand me? Yes or no? We don't want yes or no questions because we want people to be able to tell us more. Excuse me. Go ahead, Claire.
I'm sorry. Don't ask why, ask what.
Don't ask why, ask what. Or how. Those questions that are going to give you more information so you can make better decisions about next steps. This is a really important tip. To listen to the silence as well as the words. Learn to be comfortable with silence. It is a form of communication. It allows people to connect on a different level. So how do we have this difficult conversation? We've talked a little bit about planning. Well, I'm going to give you a framework of 4 steps. The first, in your planning, as part of that, you're going to desire what's your purpose, what's your outcome. The second step is what's your story? And that's where you're going to include the data that you have, the impact on the fraternity. The third step is to listen to their story with curiosity, and then to problem solve together. Those are the 4 steps. Now, someone came up to me at the break and said, do you have any of those phrases we can use? And I do. One of the things I want to tell you to try to start every conversation with is, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. To include that we value you as a fraternity brother or sister. Help us to understand where you're coming from. When we say to someone, help us to understand, we're inviting people to educate us. We show that we're open to hear their story. Let's work on this together. How can we prevent this from happening in the future? Notice the we's. We care about you. We're confident we can find a solution we can all work with. We're seeing opportunity here, setting the stage. You don't have to say every single one of these, but these are phrases that I give you. Find out what works for you. And if one of these doesn't work for you, come up with your own. I think Diane was the one who said we want to be authentic. During that conversation, I told you this is one of my favorites. I need a few minutes to process that. I need a few minutes to think about that. How can we support you? And then that paraphrasing, what I heard you say is, did I get that right? Remember, we always want to ask for correction if we got something wrong. Finding that common ground by saying, I agree with you on, there's a statement that you can use to find that common ground. You might learn something that you didn't know and say, I wasn't aware of that. Tell me more. That's really helpful to know. I hear your point, but I have a different view. It's different than saying you're wrong. Tell me more. I want to understand. Another one is simply go on. Those are, again, make these your back pocket phrases that you can use. As you're wrapping up the conversation, some helpful phrases to help you at the end. You might need to say, let's take a little breather or a break before we think this through. Maybe you don't come up with a solution the first time you talk. Or you say, let's just take a break. We'll get back to this when we both had time to think about it a little bit more, maybe cool down a bit. And if you see the other person getting really worked up and angry, you can take that on yourself and say, you know what? I'm feeling myself getting a little emotional here. I need time to take a break from this. And use that as your excuse to end that. That's where you can reflect that feeling back to be able to help people. And that gives them the space and grace that they need. Maybe they don't want to admit that they're upset. Maybe they don't want to admit that they need a break. But you, in that leadership position, you can offer that space to them. And when it comes to finding solutions, what do you suggest we do? Listen to their suggestions. It's funny, many of us have worked with youth before, and sometimes, even with my own kids, if you ask them what their punishment should be, it might be worse than what I would say.
Yeah.
And when you ask other people what their solution is, you don't know what it's going to be. And maybe you could offer something more merciful. Give that space for that. At the end of a conversation, you always want to recap. So, this is what we've agreed to. Don't leave without saying, this is what we agreed to, this is the plan. And then checking, is that your understanding? Always schedule a follow-up and say to them, let's schedule some time to talk about this and we'll see how things are going and how things are moving forward. Not in an accusatory, I need to check on you way, but in a supportive way. So those are, I think some simple phrases that can help make a big difference. So I'm bringing you back to these 4 steps. And what we're going to do is we are actually going to pass out, Diana and Mary Frances are going to pass out some stickers. And we're going to break you up into 10 groups. So we will tell you where your group is going to go based on your number. And what we have is, you can listen to this while we do this. We have a couple different scenarios. Just pass the stickers out first. Yeah? So these are the different scenarios. And what we're going to ask you to do in your small group is to come up with, and you can personalize this, come up with it, take that situation, figure out what's your purpose, what's your outcome. You're going to make up your part of what the data in your story is and the impact. Someone's going to be the person to tell their story and then show how are you going to problem solve together. So these are the different scenarios that we have. The first one is dealing with personality clashes between two fraternity members. That can be very destructive to a fraternity if you have two people that are at each other's throats. Here's another one. Repeated and prolonged failure to fulfill the obligations of what it means to be a secular Franciscan. Continuously disruptive and rude member. We need to remove a council member. That's serious stuff. It's very serious. A member in an invalid or gay marriage. These are all real issues, folks. And there are ways that we can handle them with grace, compassion, and mercy, and be true to our vocation. And then the last scenario is political commentary brought into the fraternity gathering or on emails or on social media. You know, we have a responsibility to bring the light of Christ into the world. So if you have a Facebook page and you're friends with a lot of people, you have a responsibility to be careful what you're putting out there. It can be very tempting. We can still support our social justice issues and what we believe in, but we can do so with respectful posts.